Rachel Moran was the youngest child of 4 to the parents Ray and Wanda Moran. She had 2 sisters and a brother. Rachel was the baby of the family. Kerry was 17 and Vanda 11 and John 6 when she was born on the 7th of January 1981 in County Wicklow in Ireland. But when she was 6 months old, the whole family moved to Hull in the UK, so Rachel's mother would have more support raising the children. Ray was a deep-sea fisherman and was gone for long periods of time, so it was hard on Wanda raising 4 children practically on her own. When the family moved to Hull, Ray got a job locally and was therefore home more often. Hull, or Kingston upon Hull, is a port city in East Yorkshire. It sits on the northern shore of the Humber estuary, a few miles inland from the east coast of England. Because of the move to Hull, Rachel experienced having both her parents present in her life. Wanda would admit that Rachel being the youngest, they were perhaps a little overprotective of her. As the age gap was so large between the siblings, the other children all grew up and moved out, and Rachel was the only one living at home, almost like an only child. She was shy but loved to dance. This included Irish dancing while in primary school. As she got older, she moved on to tap and ballet. Her talent was strong when it came to ballet. At 16, though, she hung up her ballet shoes as she had grown too tall at 6 foot. She also decided that she did not want to do her final exams in secondary school, and so she transferred to a local community college to study IT. Her teenage behaviour also kicked in at this stage. She began smoking and became secretive. Wanda at the time was alarmed and worried, but looking back now she admits that Rachel was turning into a typical teenager that was trying to get her independence and trying new things. Rachel would eventually get a job in a hotel as she wanted to work in hospitality, but after a year she quit and decided to do a course in cabaret and entertainment. She loved it and especially loved being on stage, and was in many performances in Blackpool, which is a high tourist area of England. In January of 2000, Rachel would meet her first proper boyfriend, Mark Shepherd, who was also on the same course as her. They were so into each other that Rachel made the decision to leave home and move in with Mark's family, so they could be together. After a few months they got their own little place, a flat in Hull in the Orchard Hill estate. This place was perfect for Rachel as it was less than a mile from her parents' house. Mark took a job as a painter and decorator, and Rachel got a job in a local creche and also had a job as a cake decorator. Because of the two being so young, they were still very much attached to their families. They would spend time separated, each going to their own families for holidays like Christmas and Easter, and then meet up in the flat to play house again. And they worked very hard. Family and friends were important, but also they were mad about each other. But the Christmas of 2002 would be different. They would adopt 2 little kittens, and they named them Speedy Tomato and Batman. Even though Rachel would normally stay with her parents over this holiday period, it was changed to just during the day and evenings, as she didn't want to leave the kittens overnight on their own. Mark, on the other hand, was at his family home in Preston. On New Year's Eve, Rachel made plans to go out with her brother and his friends. She had bought new clothes for the occasion, and her prize buy was a new leather jacket. Normally, it wasn't a night she'd go out, but as she had bought new clothes, she thought to herself she may as well make use of them. They all went to their local, the National pub, to bring in the new year. Mark, on the other hand, decided not to go out that night because money was tight after the expense of Christmas. Mark not going out meant that he would stay in the flat and look after the kittens, so Rachel decided to go back to stay at her parents' house once the night was over. Rachel and her brother John arrived home that night at around 1:30 a.m. Ray was already gone to bed and Wanda was dozing by the fire. John went straight up to bed, but Rachel and Wanda sat chatting about the night out. Rachel rang Mark to check in on him and the kittens. When she rang the home phone, there was no answer. She then tried his mobile and one of his friends picked up. Rachel could hear music and people in the background. Mark then took the phone from his friend and explained to Rachel he had got a last-minute invitation to a house party and decided to go. This really annoyed and upset Rachel because there was no one with the kittens, and he broke the agreement. After Rachel got off the phone with Mark, she decided she was going to walk back to the flat and spend the night there. She went upstairs to her bedroom and changed her clothes. When she came down, she headed straight for the front door and shouted goodbye to her mother. Wanda leapt straight up out of her chair when she heard the front door shut. Following her out, she begged Rachel not to go. It was late at night, cold and dark, and not a night to be out on your own. Wanda considered driving Rachel, but she had had a few drinks and so couldn't. As they were outside in the front garden, discussing what to do, a man passed and Wanda considered asking him to walk with Rachel back to the flat. But Rachel kept saying she'd be fine, and it wasn't even that far anyway. In the end, Wanda gave in, but told Rachel to ring her the minute she got to the flat. This call would never be made. When the call never came, Wanda tried to ring Rachel's mobile, but it would just ring out, and so she tried Rachel's house phone, and again no one would answer. Wanda had thoughts in her head that maybe Rachel had decided to find Mark before she went back to the flat, but that wouldn't explain why she was not answering her mobile, and Rachel knew that her mother would be worried and wouldn't put her through that. By 4:30 a.m. Wanda gave up trying to contact Rachel, not because she didn't care, obviously, but because she didn't really know what else to do. She couldn't drive around looking for her, as she had drink in her, and so had Ray and John. Later that morning at around 10 a.m, Wanda woke to the sound of her husband Ray on the phone. Wanda jumped up out of bed and went downstairs hoping that he was on the phone to Rachel, but he was on the phone to one of their other daughters, Vanda. Wanda told her husband and the family about the events of the early morning, and so the whole family tried in vain to contact Rachel. Finally, someone picked up the home phone at the flat, but it wasn't Rachel, it was Mark. Mark was confused at first, as he thought Rachel was staying at her parents' house the night before. He explained to the family that he did stay out all night and returned to the flat at around 7 a.m, and the flat was empty, which he expected as he knew Rachel was staying with her parents. Nothing seemed out of place. The bed hadn't been slept in, everything was the same as it was left the night before, and the kittens hadn't been fed. It appeared that Rachel had not arrived back that morning. The Moran family were in full panic mode at this stage and rang her friends and family members to see if anyone had seen or heard from her. Nobody had. Now it was time to ring the police and report Rachel missing. The police took a statement as to what had happened the night before. They checked out Rachel's flat and searched the area between her parents' home and the flat. The police took the disappearance very serious straight away, thanks to her parents insisting how out of character it was for Rachel to be missing. Over 40 police officers were assigned to the case, and of course they started with the people closest to Rachel and worked their way outwards. They interviewed pretty much everyone that knew Rachel, particularly her mother Wanda, as she was the last person known to see her. She ran through her timeline of the night in question and even told them of the passer-by that she was going to ask to walk Rachel home, and that this man was walking in the same direction Rachel would have walked to get home. The police took this information about the man and tried to track him down. Mark, Rachel's boyfriend, was brought in for interview, and immediately the police had their suspicions about him. On the whole, Mark and Rachel had a good relationship, but Mark's reaction was very stoic, and the police were aware that Rachel on the night was very annoyed with him for going out and leaving the kittens on their own. The police didn't like the fact that Mark didn't seem very upset that Rachel was missing, but they did check his alibi for that night, and his friends confirmed that he was with them the whole night. Rachel's family also knew that Mark absolutely adored Rachel and he wouldn't hurt her. So with Mark ruled out as a suspect, the police had to go in another direction with their investigation. It was determined that Rachel had not used her mobile phone after leaving her parents' house, and her bank account was untouched. This discounted that she left of her own accord. CCTV footage was collected in a 6-mile radius of where Rachel would have walked. They went to businesses, the council and homeowners to collect everything they could. This would turn out to be productive. They spotted Rachel walking along on Hall Road the night she went missing. She was walking in the direction of her flat, so this showed that she intended to go straight there. This footage made the police narrow their search to the route Rachel was taking, and door-to-door inquiries were made. They brought in sniffer dogs, helicopters, fields and gardens were being searched, drains and rivers were being dragged. The police were doing everything to find Rachel. By now it had been days and days, and the police were losing hope in finding poor Rachel alive. 2 weeks after Rachel went missing, and a mile from Rachel's flat, a few items belonging to her were found in a canal. They found a trainer that matched the description of what she was wearing that night. The next day they found a woman's handbag in a bin bag. Inside the handbag was a mobile phone, cosmetic items and an Irish passport. I take it this was for ID purposes, as like here in Ireland back then, we didn't have ID cards, and so we'd use our driving licence or passport so we could get served in a pub, especially if we looked younger than our age. Ah, them were the days, to look younger than we were. When the police opened the passport, it was confirmed that it was Rachel's belongings. The police continued searching the canal as they felt if her belongings were dumped there, maybe Rachel had also. But alas, there was no sign of her. The police then decided to do a reconstruction of Rachel's last movements. So they used a female police officer that looked like Rachel, and at the same time of night, wearing the same type of clothes, they filmed her walking down the road. The footage was released to the public as part of an appeal, which worked to an extent. Several people came forward with information, and new CCTV footage from a nearby school was handed in. This footage, although terrible, showed what was believed to be a woman walking down a road that was just 500 feet away from Rachel's flat. The footage also showed a man walking a little distance behind her. The police were not sure if this person was following the woman or even if it was a man. The footage was in a very built-up area, and again the police narrowed down their search. They believed if this was Rachel in the footage and this other person was responsible for her abduction, it would be very hard to get rid of her body. The police went door to door in the area and asked the occupants if they could come in and search their flats, houses and sheds. The search began on the 28th of January 2003. The search teams consisted of 2 police officers and a specialist searcher. This search would pay off and give them the breakthrough they needed. On the same day the search began, they came upon a flat on Nash Court, number 19. Here lived a man named Michael Little. When police knocked on his door, he let them in straight away. Obviously, everyone in the area knew Rachel was missing and so expected the police to call. When Michael let the police in, he introduced them to his friend that was visiting, Mark Fuller, not Rachel's boyfriend. Michael walked the police officers around the flat, which was an absolute tip. The police didn't find anything and were satisfied with the search. That was until they were leaving. On leaving, they decided to check Michael's bin cupboard, which was originally used as a coal store when the houses were first built, which was attached to the flat and about 3 foot high. When the police went to search inside it, it was locked. Michael was asked for the key. He said he wasn't sure where the key was, but the police were so insistent in getting into the cupboard that Michael went to another room and retrieved the key. He handed it over to the police. They unlocked it and began searching through it. Once they had some stuff pulled out, they came across what they thought to be a mannequin, but on further inspection they realised it was a body of a young woman. It was poor Rachel. Now you might be asking how no one noticed the smell of a decaying body. Michael, you could say, lived in squalor and his bin cupboard was no exception. It was so bad that it masked the smell coming from poor Rachel. I don't know if you've ever smelled a dead body. I have, and I can only imagine what it was like after 4 weeks. Pretty bad, so that shows how bad Michael's flat and bin cupboard were. Rachel was found wrapped in a duvet. The 2 men in the flat were arrested straight away. Michael was calm, whereas Mark was freaking out. The police called for backup, and Mark was taken away to the police station. While they were waiting on a second police car to pick up Michael, a police officer was alone with him. Michael began chatting with the officer and confessed to the murder. The police officer took down everything Michael was saying. "I'm so glad you found her. I've wanted to tell someone for ages. It's such a weight off my chest. I saw the police stuff on the news and I hope they would come here. I've not told anybody else. Nobody knows. I can't be a normal person doing this. I must be evil or something. I saw her that night walking alone, so I went over and spoke to her. She came back here for a drink and we chatted for a while, but ended up arguing. I think I walked out of the room or something, and when I came back she had gone to the kitchen and was stood at the side with her back to me. When I went near her, she turned around and I saw a small knife in her hand. She slashed out at me and cut me on my arm, so I grabbed a knife and just stabbed her." Another version he gave was Rachel had approached him that night on the street, saying she feared walking home on her own. Michael had agreed to walk with her and he asked her to his flat for a drink. Once there, they began to argue. Michael slapped Rachel. She ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. He alleged Rachel slashed his arm with a knife, and in retaliation he grabbed another knife and stabbed her in the back. After Rachel died, he cleaned the flat and put Rachel into the bin cupboard, where she lay until she was discovered 4 weeks later. After these confessions, and the first of many stories he told about what happened to Rachel, Michael was taken to the police station, and news of the 2 men's arrest spread quickly. When the Moran family were informed of the arrests and the discovery of Rachel's body, they were devastated, but relieved at the same time. At least they knew she was not lost anymore. The not knowing was over. It had been 4 long weeks, and now they knew she would be coming home. As soon as Rachel's body was found, forensics and the pathologists went to the flat to recover Rachel. A post-mortem would also take place over the coming days. Mark Fuller was released without charge and Michael was charged with murder. It was said that Michael had only moved into the flat a few months before Rachel's killing, and he had never seen her before the night he attacked her. On Friday, the 31st of January, Michael appeared before the courts to be officially charged with murder. He pleaded not guilty, stating it was self-defence. Mark, Rachel's boyfriend, said he had never seen Michael before. So who was Michael Little? He was one of 6 siblings. He had 1 older brother and 4 younger half-sisters. He had a difficult childhood, and by the time he was a teenager, he was acting out, and social services had become involved. Michael was an outcast in school. He was bullied for his weight and was nicknamed Podgy. He left school at 16 with no qualifications. He was unable to hold down a job long term. He was seen as a fantasist and told the few friends that he had that he was dating a 6-foot blonde model. Of course, when the police heard this, they thought that even though Michael didn't know Rachel, he could have seen her as he did live quite close to her flat. He also wanted to portray to the people around him an image of an unhinged artist. He would sit by his window in his filthy flat and sketch what he saw, and maybe he had seen Rachel from his window. Rachel was laid to rest on the 28th of February 2003. Family travelled from Ireland and her friends came to pay their respects. Father White, who knew Rachel, officiated the funeral. He had known her as he had been the chaplain of the Catholic school she had attended. He said, quote, "In my 43 years as a priest, I have never been touched by a death, an accident, a tragedy, as I have by this senseless, untimely death of this lovely girl. She felt happy and secure through the 21 years of her life. The police also investigated what Michael was up to New Year's Eve when Rachel disappeared. That night he had been out with a couple of his friends, but by the end of the night he had become annoyed and frustrated, as a girl he had been flirting with all night ended up with a friend of his. After this he went to another party where he stayed until after the midnight countdown. When he decided to walk home to his flat, he would have walked down the same road Wanda lived on, and it is understood that he may have been the man that passed by the house and who Wanda was going to ask to walk with Rachel to her flat, and he may have overheard the conversation Rachel and Wanda were having about her walking home alone. So with this in mind, the police went back to the CCTV footage of Rachel passing the supermarket, and 3 minutes before Rachel was captured on the CCTV, a man was captured also. The police were convinced this was Michael in the footage, but when you looked at the second lot of footage, who they believed to be Michael was now following who they believed to be Rachel. To the police, the timeline between each footage that was captured was in line, so it was possible that Michael went ahead, waited for Rachel to pass so he could follow her and make his move. Rachel's post-mortem results would eventually come through, and it would go totally against Michael's claim of self-defence. Her cause of death was from stab wounds, 27 in total, to her head, chest and back. These stab wounds were so severe that they went right through poor Rachel. Rachel also had hardly any defence wounds, which would mean she was caught by surprise, and the attack was so frenzied she didn't have a chance to defend herself. Michael had no cuts on his arms, which proved that what he had said about Rachel attacking him first with a knife never happened. There was also dried mud found on the back of Rachel's legs, which led the police to think that Michael grabbed her and dragged her to his flat. The police surmised that on the night Rachel was killed, Michael saw her as he passed her mother's house. After being rejected earlier that night, he may have decided to wait for Rachel up the road and approach her and ask her back to his flat. If this is what happened and Rachel said no, it would have been his second rejection in one night. So they thought this sent Michael over the edge, and he was not willing to take another rejection. Michael put his hand over Rachel's mouth and dragged her back to the flat. Once he got her inside, he immediately began to stab her, as Rachel's blood was only found in the hallway, inside the bin cupboard and on the walls near the front door. The pathologist did say also that Rachel had been sexually assaulted. They couldn't determine if she was alive or dead when this happened. The police decided because of this Michael was not charged with rape. They also couldn't prove that Rachel didn't willingly have sex with him either if she had been alive. They did, however, feel they had a strong case when it came to the charge of murder. When Michael's trial began in October 2003, his story completely changed. The defence claimed that Michael was not the killer, but he did have sex with Rachel that night. He now claimed that it was Mark Fuller, his friend, that was arrested at the flat at the same time as him, had killed Rachel. The police had no evidence linking Mark to the crime, and that is why they released him so quickly. Michael's new story was that on the night in question, he arrived home and Mark Fuller was already in his flat with a woman, and this woman was Rachel. Mark, according to Michael, had met Rachel that night as he was supplying her with cannabis, and after the exchange, Mark invited Rachel over to Michael's flat. So when Michael got to the flat, they all sat together and were having a good night. Michael claimed that at one stage he went into his bedroom. Rachel followed him in, asking him if he thought she was good looking. He told her she was, that he thought she was gorgeous, and as soon as he said that, Rachel put her arms around his neck and began kissing him. Ugh, this reads like a bad romance novel. He would go on to say that they both had consensual, unprotected sex, and shortly after this his friend Mark burst into the room. He said Mark was furious with him for having sex with Rachel, and in turn furious with Rachel also. Mark went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, returned to the bedroom and started stabbing Rachel repeatedly. When Rachel was dead, Mark threatened him and his whole family if he didn't help him clean up and hide the body. Michael said he had no choice as he feared Mark so much. He did what he was told. Of course, no one believed this story, and the forensics stood against everything Michael had said happened. Even the original story of self-defense couldn't stand up against the evidence. What the police put together was the closest to what happened to Rachel that night, and the jury would agree. On the 30th of October 2003, Michael was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. The judge also said that he feels that Rachel did not consent to sex with Michael, and the Moran family felt vindicated by this statement. He also recommended that a minimum term be set for Michael. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read out and when the sentence was handed down. On Wednesday, the 16th of May 2007, Michael's minimum tariff was set at Bristol Crown Court. The judge announced that it would be 25 years before he would be eligible to go before the parole board. Rachel's mother would go on to write a book about Rachel and her murder, called it The Murder of Rachel, to make sure she would never be forgotten. Vanda, Rachel's sister, would pass away in August of 2010. She was a diabetic and suffered with her health because of this. She was hospitalized after being exposed to chickenpox. Complications arose and she passed away. The Moran family strongly believed that Michael did not just take Rachel's life, but took Vanda's too, as she never got over the death of Rachel, and being in poor health already, she did not have the strength and will to carry on. Rachel and Vanda are buried side by side, and it is where the family visit to find their peace with the two girls. Wanda would write in her book about Rachel, quote, "The most important and crucial player in this pitiful scenario is Rachel herself. Our grief is nothing compared to the life that has been taken so cruelly. All of her potential has been stolen, obliterated, her brilliant light snuffed out as if it was nothing, by a vile creature who thought not at all of the consequences on that fateful night." Mark, Rachel's boyfriend, said his biggest regret was he was unable to say goodbye to Rachel. Ray, Rachel's father, had been destroyed by her murder, and at times he feels he has nothing to live for. He frequently cries and feels guilty if he does normal things or feels happy at events. He would feel disloyal. I guess to sum things up, Rachel's family were devastated by her death, and it is something they live with now, even to this day. Ray and Wanda lost two daughters, and they grieved them both equally and loved them both equally.